Hi there, this is Fiona from IELTS with Fiona and the Members Academy. Now, I had a request this week from somebody in my Bronze Academy, which is my website blog, and they asked for more practice with multiple choice questions in the listening test. So one benefit of multiple choice in the listening test is that there are only 3 options, which makes it a little easier. And of course, you've got all of those strategies like underlining the key words and dismissing distractors and all of that test day strategy. But that's no use to you if you don't really understand what they're saying. So the focus of this lesson is I'm going to look at 5 different strategies that the test writers use when they're writing these multiple choice questions. The first one, you'll know, it'll probably be the most common tip that people give you, which is about synonyms. And then the rest, I think, nobody tells you. And I'm going to show you how it applies to one specific listening called a science experiment for Year 12 students. So it's 2 trainee teachers talking about setting up this science experiment. And the first set of questions is multiple choice. The question 21 says, how does Claire, that's the female teacher, feel about the students in her Year 12 science class? They're all negative feelings for A, B, and C. A, she's worried that they're not making progress. B, she's challenged by their poor behaviour in class. Or C, she's frustrated at their lack of interest in the subject. So you might think that the answers are in the synonyms. How does she feel? Is she worried? Is she challenged? Is she frustrated? But actually they're not. The answers are in the synonyms for each one of those problems. So let me just read you what she says. She's talking to her colleague Jake, and he says, how are you getting on? And she says, it's not brilliant, I'm really struggling. So it's already negative with my Year 12 science class. Now, he says, are they hard to control? And she says, well, I don't have discipline problems as such. So yes, you can immediately now cross out the poor behaviour in class. So it doesn't matter that she is challenged by their poor behaviour. This distractor was a negative. It's discipline problems is a synonym for poor behaviour, and she immediately says, no, I don't have discipline problems. And she says it's just that they don't seem to think that science has anything to do with their lives. It's depressing. So she's kind of suggested a problem there. They listen to what I say, and I gave them a test last week. And the results weren't too bad, but there's no real engagement. So the first thing she said was she gave them a test. The results weren't too bad. So you can immediately now cross out worried that they are not making progress. She's not, because the results were okay. So you can see you've got synonyms and antonyms, the opposite. So they weren't too bad is the opposite of they are not making progress, if you see what I mean. But there's no real engagement. So this gives you the answer, their lack of interest. So it's a synonym, but it's almost using the opposite. So engagement would be interest, but she's saying there's a lack of interest. There's no real engagement. And that is the answer. So you would need to know the synonym for engagement, which is interest, feeling engaged. But you could simply just eliminate, so cross out A and B. And that's what we're going to do with each of these questions. We're going to look for what's the synonym and what's the opposite or the antonym. So question 22, how does Jake react to Claire's suggestion about an experiment based on children's diet? Again, there are three kind of negative feelings. So they're all negative. He's concerned that the results might not be meaningful. So he's worried that the results, would not be meaningful. B, he feels some of the data might be difficult to obtain. And C, he suspects the conclusions might be upsetting. So this is what he says. He says, so let's think. Your methodology would involve the children recording what they eat. But you'd also need to have access to the children's medical records. And I don't think people would be happy about that. Confidentiality would be an issue. If you could get the right data, the conclusions might be significant. But I suspect it's just not going to be easy. So you've got that word easy, and he said it's not going to be easy getting the right data. Why not? Because you don't have access to the children's medical records. So that gives us answer B. He feels some of the data might be difficult to obtain. Now, difficult is the antonym, opposite of easy. So this is what I'm trying to teach you in this lesson, is don't always listen for synonyms. Sometimes you have to listen or recognize the opposite. So we use this in academic writing all the time when we paraphrase things. When we say things in a different way, instead of saying it's difficult, we say it's not easy. And I've got a whole list of, I think, a comprehensive list of those ways of paraphrasing by using the opposite word. Another thing at this point to notice, and this is really important, when you listen to part 3, it's people speaking, it's conversational English, it's informal. But, of course, the questions are written English. They are more formal. So you can expect the written questions to have formal versions of what you hear. So this is another really important thing that you need to practice, is formal written English versus spoken conversational English. So, for example, there, the answer was the data might be difficult to obtain. Now, obtain is a formal word for get, simply get. And I've got a whole list of expressions with get there on my website. And you can see the exact synonym. If you could get the right data, if you could obtain some of the data, but it may be difficult, it's not going to be easy. There were some tricks in there. For example, C, he suspects the conclusions might be upsetting. Well, no, people would not be happy about sharing their medical records, but it doesn't mean that the conclusions might be upsetting. Question 23. What problem do they agree may be involved in an experiment involving animals. So again, we're looking for a problem. Also notice it has to be something that they agree about. So there are certain clues where they say, right, I see what you mean, things like that in other listenings. So what problem do they agree may be involved in an experiment involving animals? And the options: A, the results may not apply to humans. So maybe what is true for animals may not be true for humans. B, it may be complicated to get permission. Think of a synonym for complicated and think of the opposite like we did before with difficult and easy. And C, students may not be happy about animal experiments. That was the first thing that came to my mind, actually. How can you do animal experiments with children? Anyway, Jake says, have you thought about doing an experiment using animals? Claire says, wouldn't that be upsetting for the children? Notice upsetting was in the previous question, so you can see that's just a trick, just a distractor. Wouldn't that be upsetting for the children? And Jake says, well, the animals don't have to be harmed in any way. So you can immediately cross out C. Students may not be happy about animal experiments. They've dismissed this one. They said, well, the animals wouldn't be harmed. And he says it could just be an experiment where they are given a certain diet and the effects are observed. Claire says, would I have to get permission to use animals? Permission is in B. B says it may be complicated to get permission. And he says, yes, you would have to, but it's quite straightforward. So straightforward, opposite of complicated. And so you can cross out B. It is not complicated to get permission. It's straightforward. So that only leaves us with A, and we need to confirm this with synonyms. She says, if we found out that a diet affects the health of animals, the same thing wouldn't necessarily be true for people, would it? And he agrees, no, that's true. So you can see they both agree on this. And the synonyms, it may not apply to humans. It may not be true for people. That's the synonym. So the answer is A. Question 24. What question do they decide the experiment should address? So there's a signal here. I often talk about signals in part 3 where they kind of introduce the question. Jake says you would need experimental mice, ones that have been specially bred for experiments. Okay, so what will your experiment be investigating exactly? This is the question for 24. And the 3 options are: mice capable of controlling their food intake? B, does an increase in sugar lead to health problems? Or C, how much do supplements of different kinds affect health? Supplements may be a key word there. Just means things that you take in addition to your normal diet. You might take a vitamin D supplement in the winter, for example. So she says something to do with nutrition. Maybe we could look at food supplements like iron and extra protein and their impact on health. Jake says, that might be rather broad. So let's cross out C. He's dismissed it. Maybe just look at the effects of one supplement like sugar on the health of mice. So remember in option B, there was a mention of sugar and it says, does it lead to health problems? So you have to be careful here Claire says maybe the focus could be on whether mice can control their own diet. So that gives us answer A. Are mice capable of controlling their food intake? So capable, synonym for can they. Their own diet, their food intake. The sugar really is a red herring, a real nasty trick, because Jake comes back to it. He says, oh yes, so what happens when they have access to more sugar that they really don't need? He mentions sugar, but it's not about an increase in sugar leading to health problems. It's about their control. Claire confirms this. Do they eat it or do they leave it? And he agrees. He says, great. Then he suggests later on you could do a follow-up experiment. And this is question 25. Claire might also consider doing another experiment involving, and you've got 3 options. They are all mentioned, but she chooses one. Other types of food supplement. B, different genetic strains of mice. Or C, varying amounts of exercise. So Jake comes first. He says, you could give some of the mice the chance to be more active and the others just sit around and don't do much. So that's the option C, varying amounts of exercise. That's his suggestion. And she says, or I could repeat the experiment, but change the type of food. That would be option A, other types of food. Or, she says, I could use mice with a different genetic structure, and that's option B, different genetic strains of mice. So all 3 are mentioned. He suggests something, and then she suggests another 2 things. She says, but I think your idea would be more interesting. So she chooses his idea. You should vary the amounts of exercise. And she says, yes, I think your idea would be best. Now, the point about this one is you have to retain all 3 options in your head, because you have to think, well, which one was his idea? It is relying on your memory in some ways, or it's really relying on you understanding how he suggested something, she suggested something, and she decided on his suggestion, but you would have to remember what he suggested. The next set of questions is a flow chart. It's a kind of gap fill with answers because they give you a list of answers. But again, I'm going to focus on how they use synonyms and antonyms and paraphrasing and this idea of formal and informal language. There are 8 nouns: size, escape, age, water, cereal, calculations, changes, and colour. Now remember, you don't have to spell those. You're just writing the letter down. You don't have to write the full word. So the first gap in the workflow is that you should choose mice which are all the same something. So remember, this is Jake now giving advice to Claire. She says, how many mice would I need? He says, about 12. All young ones, not a mixture of old and young. So all young ones means they need to be all the same age. So the answer there for 26 is age. Choose mice which are all the same age. 27, divide the mice into 2 groups, each with a different something. So you've got 2 groups. What's different about them? She says, okay, I need 2 groups of equal sizes. How would I tell them apart? I suppose I could put some sort of tag on one group, or just mark them in some way. And he says, yes, you could use food colouring. That wouldn't hurt them. So he's suggesting that she dyes them with food colouring. So the answer for 27, each has a different colour, and it's H. Then you put them in a separate cage and you feed group A commercial mouse food. You feed group B the same, but also sugar contained in something. So they both get the same food, but one of the groups gets sugar. And how do you administer the sugar? Well, she says the other group would have the same as the first group, but they'd also have the extra sugar. Jake says, would you just give them straight sugar? And Claire replies, it might be better to give them something like cereal with it. So not just sugar, put cereal and sugar together. So the answer for 28 is cereal. But again, there's a formal, informal element. She says the sugar would have cereal with it. And in the written version, it says the sugar contained in cereal. It's a past participle there, a reduced past participle clause, which they use a lot in the questions. Sugar which is contained in cereal. That's 28. Then you take measurements on an electronic scale and you place them in a weighing chamber to prevent something. So prevent, quite a formal word, to stop the mice doing something. Let's see. Jake says, so you need something called a weighing chamber to stop the mice from running away. That's it, to stop the mice from running away. Notice the phrasal verb, run away. What's the synonym? Escape. So the answer for 29 is to prevent, escape. And that's a really nice example of formal and informal. And the next one also follows the same pattern of formal and informal. So 30 says, do all the necessary something. Now, if you look at the list, there's only a few words which fit that expression, to do something. Do size, do escape, no. Do age, do water, do cereal, do calculations, do changes, or do colour. The only one that fits there is calculations, because it's make changes. So we're listening for something which means calculations. And she says, once we've measured the weight of each mouse, we can work out the average for each group. We can work out. That's a phrasal verb, informal word for the formal word calculate. So the answer is do all the necessary calculations as we were able to guess. So that's it. It's not an easy one. I think there's a lot of language there about the methodology and the procedure behind setting up an experiment. If you're doing IELTS because you're going to university, this language is really important and useful for you. So I've listed it there on my blog with an explanation and a quiz so you can practice and check that you understand the concepts. But just to summarize, what I've focused on in this listening lesson was the use of certain language types or areas. So not just synonyms, but also paraphrasing, saying things in a different way, restructuring the sentences, antonyms, formal, informal, And the last one is about retaining information. And I've got a whole other lesson about that. How you very often have to remember what was said, because they might use like a reference word like this or that or it, and that provides the answer. So this is ready. It's all ready to go. It's on my blog. You do have to be a member of the Bronze Academy, which is the entry level, to get this. And you'll get at least 200 other lessons on top of this. They all have, not all, but this lesson has a video, and you can, change the speed. You could look at the transcript. You've got the captions. You've got everything there to help you build your listening skills. And it's the same for every other lesson. They are very in-depth lessons. That's what's different between just doing a practice test and looking at them in greater depth. So if you're a teacher as well, this is really useful for you. You can do it with your students and help them see these little quirks of IELTS. So thank you for listening. Do let me know if you've got any requests. And if you can't access the website, you can at least listen to the podcast. All right. Bye for now. See you next week. Bye-bye.